about this all the time, but this is the first time I've thought of it as a survival story. I mean, I never thought about it that way, but I am, in fact, still surviving it. I'll always be surviving it. I've had a lot of friends. I've really been blessed by friends, some of whom are family. Have you ever had a friend that you had no word to describe? Like the word friend or even best friend just felt inadequate? I have. My person, my insides, my touchstone, a fundamental part of who I was in the world, who I am in the world. Her name was Amy. Just a gal I met at work in my carefree 20s. But this gal became so important to me. She was like a weight-bearing wall of my soul. And like with so many things, I didn't fully realize that until she wasn't there anymore. One day, completely out of the blue, 29 days after she got married, I got a phone call. I had just finished my first waitressing shift back after almost a year. Jazz brunch. It smelled like waffles. Phone rang. It was a friend. He told me to sit down. I sat on the floor. He told me he had some bad news. I was paying attention, but I wasn't concerned. Amy died, he said. Really? I said. Amy who? I remember with razor sharp clarity not taking in that information. It's a common name. I know like 7 Amy's. He didn't know her. Later, when my brain switched back on, I remembered his sister was good friends with Amy's new husband. His voice broke. Brian's Amy, he said. Your Amy. Sometimes we can't remember a moment of trauma. Sometimes it's fuzzy or even blank. This was the opposite. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I fell forward, still holding the phone to my ear. I felt the rough weave of the carpet on my forehead. I wasn't breathing. Everything went dark. She'd gotten married 29 days earlier, gotten back from her honeymoon 2 weeks earlier. I had spoken to her less than 48 hours earlier from my chunky Nokia cell phone. Remember those? The kind that was just a phone. I was in Target and she called. I answered and I said I'd be one of those people who I hate on their phone in the store. I talked to her up and down the aisles, through checkout, and out to my car. I got off the phone to unload my haul into my trunk. We hung up after our perfunctory talk to you later and love you. If you had told me then, in that moment, that I'd never talk to her again, I would have laughed in your face. The months after that were a blur. But as time went on, things got less blurry. But as they started to come back into focus, everything looked different. The world was no longer the same for me. If I could go back and tell my younger self how to better survive that time, it would sound just like what Amy said to me so many times. Doing great. Don't listen to them. Because she was just my friend, I guess that's supposed to make this a different kind of survival story. At least that's how most folks acted towards me at the time. They asked me how her parents were, her new husband, her brothers. 2 of them asked how I was. I felt invisible, standing there reporting how other people were coping with the same loss that had smashed my own heart into dust. The platitude that made me the most savvy was, she would want you to move on. Move on from what? Who said I was stuck? We have a really fucked up, repressed way of dealing or not dealing with grief in our society. We think it's something to work through, to get past, to come back from. I've never come back from it. My life was changed on that day more than 20 years ago, and it's never been the same. It will never be the same. I don't want it to be. I looked directly into the grief. I did not turn away. Before that, I almost always turned away from emotions automatically. My therapist back then often had to poke around to even evoke a single emotional response from me. She told me I had a hermetically sealed defense system in place from my early childhood trauma. I didn't disagree. I'd always felt like the least little bit of actual emotion might end me. So after Amy died, when I spent entire sessions not speaking, only sobbing, she finally said to me, "I'm starting to get worried." I stopped crying and I looked at her. "I'm not," I said, "for once. Finally, I'm not. I trust this. I'm giving myself over to this." And here's where joy found its way in. My grief, my loss of Amy, is not something I moved past or even merely survived. It has become deeply woven into the fabric of who I am. And it broke me open in so many ways, I can't even begin to list them. But I can say one of them is far more permission, far more space to feel all of it. To know in my bones that love and grief and joy and pain are not separate. They're all housemates. Sometimes the joy is so big, it takes my breath away. You hear that, Amy? Wherever you are now, I survived. More than survived. I cracked my heart open, and I've been mining it ever since. I always will be.